Hello? Hello? Please, I know you can hear us. We are trapped here in the spaces between worlds. It is a wonderful yet terrifying place, and only our voices escape. You can help us. You can let us in before we go mad.
The Men with No Mouths by Curtis Christensen. Why do I do this to myself? I thought as I walked toward the cemetery. You never go through with it anyways. Maybe it was just my imagination, or an optical illusion caused by the lack of moonlight, but the street lamps seemed dimmer tonight. The scraping of my boots on asphalt echoed loudly through the silence. I looked ahead to the lights of the convenience store and was drawn in. I tapped the pack of cigarettes in my front hoodie pocket. Sure enough, only a single cigarette rattled around its container. I pulled it free and lit up as I walked toward the outdoor ashtray. Looks like I am a fortunate son, I thought as a pang of melancholia coursed my body to its extremities. I didn't feel lucky. I finished my smoke and smashed the filter on the soot-blackened spot just below the hole. The ding of the door alerted the employee of my presence.
"Gotta leave your bag at the door,"
said the cashier. The man looked like a walking ad warning about the dangers of fetal alcohol syndrome. He was missing a good number of teeth in the top half of his hair. The remainder grew in an almost perfectly straight curtain of greasy brown around the sides and back of his head. It looked like the inbred spawn of Benjamin Franklin and Blaster from Beyond Thunderdome. "Why?" I asked. "I'm not going to steal anything. I'm headed straight to the counter anyway."
"Sorry, it's store policy."
Seeing no merit in arguing any further, I slipped my backpack off my shoulders and set it on the gritty floor. "All right, but nobody better steal it," I said, walking up to him. He motioned to the rest of the convenience store as he asked,
"You see anybody else in here?"
I shook my head no and pointed past his shoulder. "Guess not. Could I get a pack of Marlboro Red 100s? I asked. He turned around to grab it, and suddenly my moonless night wasn't so moonless. Ugh, I thought. Has he ever heard of a belt?
926,
he said, placing the pack in front of me. Sheesh. I swear they were 8 just yesterday. Inflation, huh?
Yup,
he replied with a little bit of abruptness that told me he was ready for me to skedaddle. Likely I was impinging on the 12th smoke break of his shift. I handed him a $10 bill. He counted out my change and I dumped it into the little take-a-penny, leave-a-penny dish. Didn't need it where I was going. I swear I could feel the cashier rolling his eyes at the back of my head as I exited. I snagged my backpack off the tiles and the door chimed again. I continued down the road toward the usual way in. It was that time of year again, my annual late-night visit to the cemetery. I had packed my usual gear, one of those little folding camp stools, a fifth of some cheap but palatable whiskey, and a good length of nylon rope. I smacked the pack of my cigarettes against the palm of my hand. No idea why, but that was what I had always seen done, and the habit stuck. I removed the plastic wrapping and tossed it on the street. It seemed odd to me that there were no cars in sight. Usually you would see a pair of headlights or two meandering along the avenue, but tonight it was empty. I pulled a cigarette from the pack, flipped it upside down, and put it back in an act of superstition. "Lucky cigarette," I mentally recited. "Make it to that one, and you're a fortunate son." I grabbed another and fished the lighter from my pocket. The flash of flame blinded me, and sparks danced across my vision. I thought I saw a man standing on the corner of the street under the blinking stoplight. When my eyes readjusted to the dark, he was gone. I inhaled sharply and felt the smoke enter my lungs. My brain rewarded me with gentle waves of pleasure. The trees to the side of the road grew thicker with each passing step. I was nearly at the graveyard now. I stopped under the last street lamp. My hands quaked slightly as I slid another cigarette between my lips. It felt almost poetic, that border between the light and dark. This might be it. This might finally be the year, I thought. With a deliberate stride, I crossed into the darkness beyond. The cemetery was closed at night, its gate locked tight, and 3 strands of angled barbed wire blocked me from climbing the fence. The only safe way in was a spot where the chain link had peeled up from the ground. To get there, I had to walk down a small trail through the woods. I could scarcely make out where the path began. Thin twigs poking out from the underbrush clawed and tugged at my pants. The trees thinned a bit as I made it to where the fence cut through the forest. It was just a little way to the opening now. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of a figure on the other side of the chain links. I froze mid-stride. I couldn't make out any details, but it looked like a man standing just a few feet away. Why would anyone be in there at this time of night? I thought, worried that maybe the cemetery had hired a security guard. That doesn't make sense, though. Surely a guard would have a flashlight. Crackhead, maybe? Slowly, I pulled out my lighter and turned my head. The man made no movements. He just stood there. His shadowy figure shifted. I needed to know who he was. I flicked the lighter to reveal the man. It was just a juniper bush. Its branches shook slightly in the light breeze. I sighed in relief and laughed aloud. The last thing I needed was somebody else wandering around while I performed my tradition. I lit another smoke. The burning ember at its end glowed fiercely orange in the dark. I followed the fence until I came to the gap. It had always amused me that the fence was peeled from the inside out, as if something had crawled out from within. I dropped the cigarette butt to the ground and smashed it with the toe of my boot. I could just make out the white and gray of stones, statues, vaults, and mausoleums. I shoved my pack under, then dropped to my belly and crawled through. The dirt was packed hard and polished smooth from my previous 14 years of use. The metal wires snagged the back of my jacket and tore a small rip. I stood up, dusted myself off, grabbed my backpack, and lit another cigarette. I always felt a kind of calm as I wandered this graveyard. Felt like coming home after a long day of work. I wove through the rows of engraved rocks, crosses, and angels toward where she was buried. Moisture welled up in my eyes before I had even reached the grave. I flicked the smoldering end off of my cigarette and placed the remainder over my ear. I never smoked in front of my daughter. "Hi, Janet," I croaked out. I knelt in front of the stone and brushed away at a bit of lichen growing on its top. I traced the chiseled indentation of her name. Tears soaked my cheeks. "I miss you, Janet," I blubbered through my hands. I pulled the whiskey out of my bag and took a long swig. Each drink pushed me further and further into sorrow. I pleaded with Janet. I begged her. It was my fault. I should have stopped her. I told her not to go.
I think I'm gonna do it this time, Janet. I don't think I can bear another trip. It had been 16 years. She would have been 30 this year. They say time heals all wounds, I thought. They're wrong. 16 years and still every day is misery. I grabbed my backpack and staggered toward the tree. It was a perfect old oak with a large horizontal limb. The images of that smashed car, of the shattered glass and blood, of her broken, barely recognizable body flashed through my mind, clear as the day of the accident. I set my bag down under the big oak's trunk. I pulled out the stool, spread its metal legs, and placed it under the branch. I drew in another pull off the bottle. Then I retrieved the noose from my backpack. After I had tied it off, I tossed it over the branch with practiced ease. Every year I had done the same, but never had the guts to go through with it. This is the one. Maybe, finally, I can be at peace. I climbed on top of the rickety stool and slipped the noose over my head. I flipped open my cigarette pack. Looks like I'm not a fortunate son this time, I thought as I removed one. Didn't make it to my lucky cigarette. I inhaled deeply, looked at my daughter's grave, and kicked over the stool. As soon as the rope cinched down on my neck, I regretted my decision. I had underestimated the sheer drive of biological self-preservation. The cigarette dropped from my mouth with a trail of red sparks. I wildly grasped at the rope above me in an attempt to hoist myself free. It was no use. My body swayed under the tree. What was I thinking? Janet wouldn't have wanted me to die like this. Blackness, even darker than the night, crept in around my vision. I heard a snap. Then I dropped. I thudded to the grass, the stool jabbing painfully into my thigh. I laid there wheezing and coughing. The black retreated from the edges of my sight. Alive! I cried out, looking at my daughter's grave. Janet, I'm sorry I ever... The rest of the sentence caught in my throat. There was someone standing behind her marker. He was dressed in a black business suit. I couldn't make out his face, but something about it felt wrong. Without taking his eyes off of me, he reached down and placed his hand on Janet's grave. Hey! I yelled. The man turned and walked away. I stood up and hobbled after him. What do you think you're doing? I asked. He kept walking and disappeared behind a large marble mausoleum. I calmed my haggard breathing and walked toward the structure. Patches of moss streaked across its faded wall. Nowhere left to go now, bud, I said. I rounded the corner, but the man was gone. Did I just hallucinate him? It was a definite possibility, given that I was still drunk and had almost killed myself. I pulled a cigarette free from my surprisingly unsmashed pack. I turned back to gather my stuff. Suddenly, the man was in front of me. The cigarette fell from my loosened lips. I was about to punch his lights out, but then I looked at his face. His black hair was slicked back in a Patrick Bateman style. His dark eyes appraised me with sharpness, but below his nose there was nothing but an expanse of skin. I spun and sprinted as fast as my legs could carry me. I fled back to the gap under the fence, except there was no gap. The chain links ran straight and snug against the ground. I figured maybe I was lost, but I saw the smooth, hard-packed dirt that had been my entry. I grabbed at the base of the fence, trying to push and pull it open. It wouldn't budge. At this point, I was ready to just climb the damned thing. I looked up.
The barbed wire at the top had somehow been inverted so that it angled down the wrong way. I pulled my jacket off and tossed it over the wires. I hoisted myself up. My hoodie was a thin defense against the sharp points. They poked through and lacerated my fingers. I managed to get my forearm on top before he appeared. He was waiting for me on the other side of the fence with 4 men beside him. They all wore different clothing that seemed outdated, but none had mouths. I dropped back into the graveyard. The barbed wire shredded my arm. I fell onto my back, knocking the wind out of myself. I had no time to catch my breath. I scrambled upright and ran all the way back to my daughter's grave. I looked back toward the fence, but no one pursued me. My hand shook violently as I tried to pull another cigarette from my pack. Several fell to the ground, but I managed to grip one. Sparks flickered from the lighter's flint as I struggled to produce a flame. I inhaled deeply of the fumes when I managed to get the damned thing lit. My heart felt like it was about to burst. The tobacco helped me calm down a bit. I pondered what could possibly be going on. Is this some kind of prank? No, it's too elaborate. No group of jokesters would have the means to pull this off. Ghosts, then? Maybe. I've never believed in ghosts, but who knows? It still could just be a hallucination. If it is, it's one hell of a phantasm. It didn't really matter what they were. I wanted to leave. I walked to the front gate, hoping that it would be unlocked. It wasn't. I gave out a hoarse call for help. The cemetery was too far away from civilization for anyone to hear. I tried to climb the vertical black bars of the gate. It was no use. They were too slick to get a good hold. There was no way out. My only idea was to avoid these mouthless men until morning. If they are ghosts, maybe they'll be gone by then, I thought. I peered through the darkness for any sign of movement. All around was nothing but graves, but for all I knew, they could be lurking in the shadows just out of sight. I felt something tap my shoulder. I dove forward into the grass. I rolled and looked back. The man in the business suit was above me, his hand outstretched. I saw dozens more of the mouthless, ambling about aimlessly. The man bent down and extended his palm to me. I scooted away as he slowly walked toward me. I got my feet back under me and pumped my exhausted legs. As I peered over my shoulder, I tripped over a low grave. My head smacked against the base of a statue. I rubbed the forming bump and looked up. There above me was an old, eroding statue of Jesus. Most of his fingers had been broken off, and someone had scratched profanities over his robes. I pulled myself up by his cold stone figure. Jesus, I know you and I aren't on very good terms, but I could really use your help, I said to the statue. I swiveled my head. There were 20 of them now circled around me. Some were soldiers in dress blues, Union uniforms, and combat fatigues. Others wore Old West attire. Many just wore average, everyday clothes similar to mine. But all of them were men, and none of them had mouths. The man in the business suit broke the circle. He strode toward me. I stood still. There was nowhere to run. There was no way to fight. This was it. I was doomed to endure whatever this man was going to do to me. I braced myself and waited. The man stopped in front of me. He held out his right hand stiffly. Confused, I reached toward it and grabbed a hold. He squeezed tightly, jerked my arm up and down 3 times, then let go. All of the men left, vanishing into the night. I trembled as I pulled out my cigarettes. There was only one left. Lucky cigarette. Maybe I am a fortunate son after all, I thought. I tried to stick it in my mouth, but it bounced off my lips and fell to the ground. I grabbed at my face. Eyes, nose, and cheeks were all there, but below was nothing.